Cannon smoke hangs low over the battlefield. Mud clings to torn uniforms. Horses scream somewhere beyond the haze as iron wheels drag artillery through the churned earth. You can taste the gunpowder in the air. And in the distance, a small figure on horseback watches it all. Not a king. Not born into royalty. Just a thin Corsican officer who once struggled to pay for his meals at military school. His name is Napoleon Bonaparte. But how does a man like that rise to command the most feared army in Europe? Imagine the world he stepped into. France was collapsing. The old monarchy had fallen. Crowds filled the streets of Paris shouting for revolution. Kings across Europe watched nervously, wondering if the fire would spread to their own thrones. And then came Napoleon. A general who moved armies faster than anyone thought possible. A strategist who could turn chaos into victory. A leader who turned a nation in revolution into an empire. Within a few years, his soldiers would march across Italy, Austria, Prussia, and beyond. Empires would fall. Kings would kneel. And for a moment in history, one man would reshape the map of Europe. But here's the question. How did Napoleon build a war machine powerful enough to challenge the entire continent? And how did the same empire rise so fast, only to collapse just as dramatically? This is the story of the French Empire under Napoleon, an era of ambition, genius, and devastating war that changed the course of history. In the late 18th century, France was in chaos. The powerful monarchy that had ruled the country for centuries collapsed during the French Revolution. Kings were overthrown, nobles lost their privileges, and the country was plunged into years of political instability, violence, and war. But from this turmoil would emerge one of the most extraordinary figures in world history, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the Mediterranean island of Corsica, shortly after the island became part of France. His family was not extremely wealthy, but they were able to send him to military school in mainland France. There, Napoleon quickly showed a remarkable talent for mathematics and military strategy. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, it changed the entire structure of French society. Many experienced officers from noble families fled the country or were removed from power. This created opportunities for ambitious young officers like Napoleon to rise quickly through the ranks. Napoleon proved himself during several early campaigns, but his real breakthrough came during the siege of Toulon in 1793. Royalist forces had taken control of the important port city and invited British support. Napoleon proposed a bold artillery strategy that helped French forces retake the city. The victory made him a national hero. Soon after, Napoleon was promoted to general at the age of just 24. Over the next few years, he continued to build a reputation as one of the most brilliant military commanders in Europe. His greatest early success came during the Italian campaign beginning in 1796. Leading the French army into northern Italy, Napoleon defeated several larger Austrian armies in a series of rapid and decisive battles. His strategy relied on speed, surprise, and concentration of force, tactics that repeatedly outmaneuvered his enemies. The campaign shocked Europe. France had suddenly gained enormous influence across Italy, and Napoleon became a legendary figure within the country. However, political instability still plagued France. The government, known as the French Directory, struggled to maintain control. Corruption and economic problems weakened its authority, and many people feared the revolution had created more chaos than stability. Napoleon saw an opportunity. In 1799, he returned from a military expedition in Egypt and joined a political plot to overthrow the government. In a dramatic event known as the Coup of 18 Brumaire, Napoleon and his allies dissolved the Directory and replaced it with a new government called the Consulate. Although the new system claimed to represent republican ideals, real power quickly concentrated in Napoleon's hands. He became the first consul of France, effectively the ruler of the nation. Napoleon began reorganizing France. He stabilized the economy, reformed education, improved infrastructure, and created a new legal system known as the Napoleonic Code, which influenced legal systems in many countries around the world. Yet Napoleon's ambitions went far beyond governing France. In 1804, he took an extraordinary step. In a grand ceremony at the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French, officially establishing the French Empire. The message was clear. The revolution had destroyed the old monarchy, but a new empire had risen in its place. Across Europe, monarchs watched with growing alarm. A revolutionary general had transformed himself into an emperor and now commanded one of the most powerful armies on the continent. War was inevitable, and under Napoleon's leadership, France would soon dominate much of Europe, reshaping the continent through a series of dramatic and devastating wars known collectively as the Napoleonic Wars. Once crowned emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte turned his attention to consolidating power across Europe. He understood that holding France together required both political stability and military supremacy. By 1805, the continent was embroiled in conflict. The Third Coalition, composed of Austria, Russia, Britain, and others, sought to contain France's growing influence. Napoleon's response was swift and decisive. At the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, he outmaneuvered a larger Allied force with brilliant strategy. The French army, using speed, deception, and concentrated attacks, crushed the Austro-Russian forces. This victory secured Napoleon's reputation as a military genius and forced much of Europe to acknowledge French dominance. Over the next decade, Napoleon reshaped the continent. He expanded the French Empire through annexation and placed family members on the thrones of allied or conquered states. His brothers ruled Spain, Naples, and Holland, turning Europe into a network of territories loyal to him. Napoleon's reforms went beyond the battlefield. Across Europe, he introduced the Napoleonic Code, which standardized legal systems, reinforced civil rights, and limited feudal privileges. Infrastructure, education, and administration were improved in occupied territories, blending the ideals of the French Revolution with imperial authority. However, war was constant. The Peninsular War in Spain became a drawn-out conflict, draining French resources. Guerrilla fighters, supported by British forces under Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, proved that local resistance could wear down even the strongest army. Similarly, Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812 became a disaster. Harsh winter, stretched supply lines, and scorched earth tactics decimated his forces, leading to catastrophic losses. Despite these setbacks, Napoleon remained a formidable figure. Battles across Europe, from Prussia to Italy, showcased his brilliance in logistics, strategy, and leadership. He inspired loyalty among his soldiers and fear among his enemies. Cities fell to his armies, treaties bent to his will, and the French Empire appeared nearly unstoppable. Yet, for all his conquests, cracks were forming. Continuous warfare strained France's economy and manpower. Resistance from local populations, combined with coalitions forming among European powers, began to challenge the seeming invincibility of Napoleon's empire. By 1813, after a series of defeats following the Russian campaign, the tide began to turn. Napoleon's once dominant army faced increasingly coordinated opposition from Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Britain. The very tactics that had brought him triumphs in earlier years now encountered enemies who had learned from his strategies. Even as his empire reached its peak, the seeds of decline were sown. Ambition, overextension, and relentless war were beginning to unravel the power of one of history's greatest empires. The beginning of the end for Napoleon Bonaparte came after the failed Russian campaign of 1812. What had been the greatest army in Europe was decimated by the harsh winter, disease, and scorched earth tactics employed by the Russians. Tens of thousands of soldiers perished, and Napoleon returned to France weakened, though still determined to retain his empire. The European powers saw their opportunity. In 1813, a new coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Britain joined forces against France. Napoleon attempted to defend his empire in the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations. Despite his tactical brilliance, the French forces were overwhelmed. By 1814, Allied armies invaded France, and Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the remote island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. But the story was far from over. In 1815, Napoleon escaped from Elba and returned to France in a dramatic event called the 100 Days. Crowds welcomed him as a hero, and he quickly rebuilt an army to reclaim his throne. However, his comeback would be short-lived. At the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon faced a combined British and Prussian army under Duke of Wellington and Gebhard Lebericht von Blücher. The battle was fierce, but strategic errors and overwhelming opposition sealed his defeat. Napoleon was captured and exiled to the distant island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he would spend the remainder of his life until his death in 1821. Despite his downfall, the French Empire left a profound legacy. Napoleon reshaped Europe through his legal reforms, administrative systems, and military strategies. The Napoleonic Code influenced legal systems far beyond France, spreading principles of civil law, equality before the law, and merit-based advancement. His campaigns demonstrated the power of modern military organization and logistics. Armies of Europe studied his strategies for generations, learning lessons in speed, mobility, and combined arms warfare. The map of Europe itself was redrawn, and many national boundaries were altered permanently. Culturally, Napoleon inspired both admiration and fear. He became a symbol of ambition, intellect, and the limits of human power. Historians continue to debate whether he was a hero who brought order to revolutionary chaos or a tyrant whose thirst for conquest caused immense suffering. The French Empire, under Napoleon, showed how quickly an empire could rise from chaos and dominate an entire continent, but also how fragile such power could be when stretched too thin. From the streets of Paris to the battlefields of Europe, his influence reshaped nations, laws, and armies for centuries to come. Napoleon's story remains a reminder. Greatness can be forged in turmoil, but even the mightiest rulers are vulnerable to overreach, resistance, and the relentless flow of history.